Begin Podfix Network transmission. In 3, 2, 1.
Whether you're fly fishing in a stream, getting those ankles wet, or deep in the ocean, casting nets, fish nerds. Fish nerds. Fish nerds. It's a podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Fish Nerds, the show about fish, fishing, and eating fish. I'm Clay Groves, Chief Executive Fish Nerd, licensed fishing guide, your best friend. And with me today is the Crappie Hippie. Hey, Crappie Hippie.
Hey, Clay. It's John King, the Crappie Hippie here, your tree-hugging redneck from eastern Kansas and co-founder of Glasswater Angling Lead-Free Fishing here in the studio with Clay this morning.
Yeah, it's early. You're like at 5 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, Clay, let's make a podcast. And I'm like, but I haven't had my coffee yet.
That's right. That's right. Picking on you before you even get your coffee. I'm telling you, man, feeling though, I'm anxious. I got to get this going, man. We're late. We're running late with the pod this week.
We are, but that's because it's National Podcast Posting Month and you've been traveling. So let's talk about Let's first talk about National Podcast Posting Month for people who haven't caught on already, because it's been pretty widely done. But every day this month, we're putting out a podcast. So today's podcast is the full episode. You're hearing that now. But tomorrow will be a short 3 to 4 minute episode of someone's fishing pet peeve. Could be yours if you call in the Fish Nerds hotline, 607-378-FISH. And then we put it on air. That's it. Easy. And you can win prizes.
You can win prizes. We are going to give away at least one $50 prize pack to somebody, and then I went on to say if we get more than 10, we'll do a couple of them, and we get more than 25, we'll do a $100 prize pack plus two $50 prize packs. So your odds of winning are fantastic.
Yes, and you can send more than one in if you got more than one fishy pet peeve. So,
oh my gosh, yes, I tell you, send them in. I mean, we will take them all and we will broadcast them all.
Yep. Which is great. And because the less you hear of me or John this month, the better. And we've been doing pretty good so far. So far, I've only had to make one. And then the rest have been all listeners, which is great. And I haven't heard you at all, John, which is wonderful.
Well, isn't that wonderful? Although I did send a couple in, but yeah, you've got them. You don't need them quite yet. So that's fantastic. And if you don't need them at all, that's fine. Well, I know where I can just save them for something else, or just I'm with you. I'd rather hear from the listeners. So
great.
Yeah, fantastic.
Great. And other ways to do it besides calling the Fish Nerds hotline is grabbing your phone. This is probably the best way to do it. And open the memo function on your phone, the voice memo, and record it there nice and clean, and then email it to clay@fishnerds.com, and it comes out nice and good that way. You sound best.
Yeah, or you can email it to crappiehippie@glasswaterangling.com. Either one.
Don't leave John out. He gets sad.
Right. Well, just in case you can't remember one, you can maybe remember the other one. But you can get it to us. You can always find us. We're easy. Instagram, we're Facebook, we're around. You can get it to us.
We're easy to get. All right, John, give us today's rundown of the show. What's happening?
Well, we're going to do a little news, and then we are going to talk to the Oklahoma pond lady, Amy Robeson, on drawdown, because we had a drought this summer in Kansas, and my pond drew way down. And so I thought I'm going to talk to Amy about the effects and benefits and whatever, the opposite of benefit.
Well, it's interesting. Do you remember fishing with me on Conway Lake?
I do remember that, yes.
They drew that lake down 25 feet this year. The whole lake to rebuild the boat launch. It looks like a river.
I bet.
Yeah, I want to go canoe out and pick lures on the rocks.
Yes. If we didn't talk about that. That's a good one. That's a good one to do when there's drawdown on a big lake.
Mm-hmm. So we'll get into that in a little bit. Let's hold that story.
We will. You're going to have to tell me more about that. But I'll tell you a little story real quick. Is that we finally got rain. We got 6 to 8 inches of rain. The pond came back up, and so the other day it was getting ready to rain a little more, and this was going to be a cold rain. But just to prove I'm crazy, just to prove you can go out and catch fish in this, because of course you can, I took my spinning gear down there, and I was looking at all the plants that have been flooded along the shore. Mm-hmm. And even in this rain was like sleet, but sleet is either hard or sometimes it's soft and it just sticks together. So these giant blobs of slush are just falling out of the sky, this kind of a thing. Well, that hadn't hit me quite yet, but I was noticing every now and then I was having a kind of a challenging time. I was still catching fish, but I didn't think to bring a fly rod, and I needed a hopper dropper because I kept seeing fish surface. There were little spiders and little bugs and little this and little that. The wind was kicking out of that flooded grass, and I'll be darned if those bluegill were not swimming around here and there, picking those things off the surface. Now that just drove me nuts. And anyway, I just had to talk to Amy. So we got the Oklahoma pond lady coming up on pond drawdown, and then we're going to do a thing on fall inshore fishing with Todd Correa. He loves to talk about his striped bass, and he has these striped bass called holdover striped bass that hang around all winter and give him something to fish at. And then we are going to finish up with an old piece we used to do on Lure Love called KLUR, Lure History Radio. And that we decided to do because Tim Beat, you remember Tim Beat, don't you?
Yep. Love Tim Beat.
Okay. Anyway, he made another great pick. He had to tell me all about it. Yeah. I'm glad he is too, submitting some stuff. And you know what? I will put in the show notes because his episode on picking lures was our most popular Lure Love episode.
It was a good one. It was solid.
Because he's really good at it.
Yep.
Yeah, very solid. And I'll make sure and put that in there. But anyway, you got a Diamond Jim Bait Company articulated swimming minnow. That's worth like $10 to $15. All these were in box, Clay. I mean, he really made a deal here. He's good at that.
Bad.
Him and Kathy, they like to hang out. But he got another company called Mueller Perry Fish Lure Company. They made a lure called the Crazy Legs, and he's
a good name.
Worth about 30 to 35.
Mm-hmm.
And then his big find was a number 40 Adam Swimmer in box. The box alone is worth like $30. So the total take on that one's going to be somewhere $45 to $70. So good investment for his $30. And we also get a KLUR on Adam Lures out of it. So thank you, Tim, for sending that in, and that'll be our final piece tonight.
All right. Well, why don't we get right into the action with some fish in the news? You ready?
I love fish in the news.
Everyone loves fish in the news.
News, fish in the news. Everybody loves their fish in the news.
All right, here we go. You ready, John?
I am so ready.
Did you put this first story up, or did I do?
You put it up, but
I don't remember.
It's like, it seems familiar because it seems like something that happened to either one of us. For
right.
Sure.
Well, the headline, John, I put these notes together like 3 weeks ago and forgot about them. So the headline is angler reels in fish for a second time after it flops out of his hands into a storm drain. That's really great. That's a solid headline. That's all I've pre-read. I just read that and thought that's news. So this happened in Valley City, North Dakota. And in Valley City, North Dakota, the phrase the one that got away briefly came to life for one fisherman. It happened when he caught a walleye and it flopped out of his hands and down a storm drain while he was posing for a picture with his cash. It's great. So he wasn't fishing in the storm drain, I don't think. Unwilling to give it up, Sean Grimm used his rod and reel and lure with treble hooks to fish the walleye out of the drain. So he was taking a photo, dropped it down the drain. So the drain was there, and then he fished it out. The Valley City Police Department traffic cameras caught the whole thing on camera, which is why it's news. It was a 22-inch long fish. It's pretty amazing. Now,
I mean, it's a beautiful walleye. Sean Grimm just looks like an ordinary dude.
mm-hmm.
It cracks me up. I'm so glad they caught this on camera because, like I say, this is like something, one of these dumb things that you're just like, why did this happen to me? Good walleye fishing up there in North Dakota. That's one thing.
Though, John, the problem is I always start thinking about fishing loss. And like moving live fish around in my state's illegal. You couldn't take a walleye out to the street corner from the lake you caught it on and take a photo of it. That'd be moving a live fish. And that's illegal in the state of New Hampshire. And a lot of states have that law, so you don't move invasives around.
Right,
so,
right, okay.
I'm going to be a negative Nancy here.
Well,
he didn't. If he caught it in that storm drain and was taking his hero shot there and then dropped it, caught it again, no laws broken. I don't know laws in his state, but in New Hampshire that would be illegal to catch it in your secret pond, travel with it, and then lose it somewhere else. So And then the other thing is,
oh no, you were going to say the other thing. I'm just laughing. I'm sitting there watching the video. It's y'all got to look at this because the video is hilarious. I mean, it's something you'll be able to identify with. And then,
sure,
of course, he wasn't going to let that nice 22-inch walleye that was going to go on his dinner, and so he pulls out a big Rapala and goes fishing for it again down in the storm drain. Got to admire that walleye for all its gumption trying to get away, and you kind of feel sorry for it. But on the other hand, Sean, he's a good angler. He's a good guy. He's just going to catch it, take it home, and eat it. And
right, nothing wrong with that.
Go to waste and let it go down there and let the rats have it. So he knocked himself out right there in front of the pizza corner until he got that thing back.
Yeah. Now here's a question for you.
Okay.
Ethical question. Now that we don't know where that storm drain drains to. It probably drains to a water treatment facility. So that fish would have been gone or anyway, even if it got away there. But so he had to get it back out of the hole. Is snagging a fish and fishing the same thing?
Yeah. I mean, if it's legal, it's fishing. If it's not legal, it's poaching. And but snagging is a tried and true method for certain fish
in certain states.
In certain states, yeah.
Yeah. In New Hampshire, you can't snag anything.
Well, you can snag paddlefish in Kansas.
That was the only way to catch them, right?
That was the only way to catch them. And actually, then of course we've had guests on that have pointed out in Kansas that we kind of wish this wasn't the case. Some of us do anyway. But yeah, your buffalo, some of your gar, some of your what are called non-game species are also allowed to be snagged, taken by any method, which is well. Anyway, we all know I'm not for that. I'd love to see them elevated to a more protected status, but that's not what we're doing right here. What are you going to say? You're saying Sean should have got a ticket because he snagged his walleye out of the sewer?
I'm just being look, here's the thing. Like, I would have done the same thing. So there's no other thing, there's no other reaction you can do but to try to get your fish back. So I think he did the right thing. I like to kind of play that kind of, well, is it this, is it that, just kind of to make the conversation. So
well, they have all the evidence. I mean, the guy's confessed. So if someone's going to get after him, they had done it by now.
He did it in front of the police camera, so he's not going to jail. So
I know it.
All right, let's move on from that. And anyway, he did the same thing we all would do. Yeah.
Let's move on from this one.
All right.
We're spinning out of control, but that's okay because
we're going to get sexy time. Some morning sexy time for us.
It's sexy time. Morning sex. Let's do it.
It seems wants to get more fish in the world. It's up to you and me, girl. Come on. There's only one way we're gonna get more fish in this world. It's up to you and me, girl. Let's spawn.
John, anytime I could play that music from the Baitcaster Cylinder, I'm happy to play it. I love that song.
I know it. Baitcaster Cylinder is awesome. I love both our themes, and I hope they send in some more soon.
I hope so. All right, well, let's talk about dating apps. John, you're a big online dater, aren't you?
No, my need for online dating never materialized. I got my mind made up before it came along, and I'm pretty set there, brother.
Yeah, and I don't online date either because, I don't date because I'm married. But let's talk about online dating because who better to talk about dating online than a couple of old fishers?
Hey, you know what? Who better?
Right. Well, this is good news. But you're aware of online dating. It's a thing. People.
Well, of course I am. I have a daughter.
Yeah. So, I've heard different things. What do you think about people posing with fish pics for their dating app picture? Like the best picture you can take of someone is them with a grouper.
I think you ought to do it if you like to fish. Let them know in advance that you're into it, because if they're not, they need to scroll on because you can't make somebody quit fishing. That's all there is to it.
Right. And it turns out, so there's been some research done on this to find out if women find men attractive while holding fish pics. Because I've heard both things. I've heard women say, no, don't do it. And others say, yeah, I don't care. Go ahead, go for it. And it looks like in Florida, this is where the study was done. And A lot of fish in Florida. It turns out 22% of young Florida men between the ages of 18 and 35 on their Tinder apps have a picture of them holding a fish. So then they did some research. They took 1,000 members of a sorority. These guys are working hard. We need 1,000 22-year-old women to come together and talk about fish.
Indeed.
We'll ply you with alcohol, and you can tell us if we're attractive. But so they grabbed 1,000 sorority members to see if men not only were more attractive holding a fish in their picture, but which fish made them appear more attractive. So we're going to break this down a little bit, John, and find out, first of all, to the men, are they attractive holding the fish? And then if you're dating online, which fish should you be holding? And before I do it, John, no, I'm gonna before I do this, I want to ask you. Let's pretend you're a 22-year-old dude. You're young, handsome, got great hair, John King, not quite the hippie yet. Right? You got an online app, you're single, ready to go. And you've got a choice of 30,000 fish, and you have one to pick that girls are going to find attractive. Which fish do you pick?
So I don't have to be a Florida guy.
Doesn't matter where you live.
In this study.
You can pick whatever fish you want. But if you want to go to Florida, we can narrow it down.
No. In fact, I'm wondering, this is such a fun article, and wondering what people would do in other parts of the country and what they'd be holding. So I'll put the same question back to you. But for me, boy, I'm trying to, do I hold a crappie? That would be the truth. And that's a pretty fish.
Yeah.
Or do I get something super cute, like a long-eared sunfish or a super cute, bluegill or something like that? Do I go cute? Or do I just, try to impress with a big old flathead? I think I'm going to have to go with crappie.
I would go with crappie. That's smart. I would go with a pufferfish.
That's brilliant.
All the way cute. I mean, there's nothing cuter, right?
Yes.
But I wouldn't have a picture of it with a hook in its mouth. I'd be like holding it like I'm making kissy faces at it. You're like, look how cute. Oh, look, he's snuggling a puffer fish. Look how cute. It's like having a kitten. So, all right. So
he's snuggling a puffer fish.
He's snuggling a puffer fish. I'd love to see a nationwide study on this same thing, and definitely to find out regionally what fish are more attractive as well. So maybe we can do some fish nerds work on the back end here. All right. So let's talk about the results in Florida. Again, this was 1,000 sorority women thought of men holding fish. What do you think, John? You think the vast majority liked the fish, didn't like the fish?
I think the vast majority. No, I think probably the majority like fish, fishers. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it. It looks like almost half, so 46% of the women were more attracted to photos of men who were holding a fish. And the one who found men more attractive then moved on to another study. So I took that group so that 46% of women, so it was 1,000 women. Now we're talking about 460 women moved on to the next part of the study. So now of those women who like men with fish, now the question is, which fish made the men more attractive? And I like how they kind of narrowing this down.
Yes. We need all the help we can get.
Yeah. So, so on their website, so they asked the question here to find if there was a fish that made the men appear more attractive than others. And I'm going to give you the results for the top 10 fish. All right. This is for those who indicated they consider men with fish to be attractive. And let's go with the least attractive, right? What do you think? What do you think the least attractive fish is going to be in Florida?
Let's see. I was going to say walking catfish, one of these ugly invasive.
And by the way, this is not limited to fresh or salt water, so it doesn't narrow it down that much.
No. I mean, I don't know. Least attractive? Mm-hmm. Gosh, I would probably say something like a grouper or a grunt or a snapper, just something kind of run of the mill, maybe.
Nope, carp.
No.
Yep. Less than 1% of women found men holding a carp attractive. I can understand that. Number 9 on the list, 3% of women. That's it. Of these 460 women, only 3% thought barracudas made men look good. And number eight at 5%. One of my favorite Florida fish I've never seen in real life that I dream of seeing one day was a hogfish.
They are a fascinating fish, actually.
Wild looking fish, and
they are.
And so only 5% of fish, because that means they're looking at that and going, like, yeah,
Yeah.
That's a quote in the study. It goes, yeah. American red snapper coming in number 7 at 8%. Amberjack at 8% as well, so tying there. So 6 and 7 are tied. King mackerel, another fun Florida fish, 9%. At number 4, John, red grouper at 12%.
Well, wow. So my grouper and my snapper did a lot better than I thought they would.
They did better than you thought. Number 3, and this is actually a really pretty fish, the African pompano at 16%.
Pompano is the way I've already said it, but the gorgeous fish, yeah.
Beautiful. And number 2, you can almost predict this. This is going to be, this is a big Florida wall hanger. Beautiful fish. What do you think it is? Ocean fish.
Oh,
huge, dangerous.
Yeah, it's got to be a billfish of some sort.
You're in the game.
Yeah. I'm thinking sailfish.
It is definitely a sailfish at 18%, John.
Whoa.
18%. And the number 1 most attractive Florida fish in your profile picture, according to these 460 sorority girls, which is a lot of sorority girls. And I'll admit, I've never been around that many of them. And I'm a little afraid of them. 21% of people say men holding the Great Northern Tilefish are the most attractive.
Well, that's actually, I think this is fantastic because these young ladies have picked out some really cool fish.
I think so.
I mean, you would think barracuda and this and that, and the king mackerel and things, sure, but really geeky, pretty, interesting fish like hogfish and Great Northern Tilefish for the win. I mean, come on, man, these are some pretty cool girls.
They are
women,
cool.
Excuse me, yes.
Yeah, we assume they're cool because they like guys who are holding fish, right?
They like guys that are holding fish, and they like guys that are holding nerdy fish.
Right, and those 54% of women who didn't like men holding fish can go pound sand.
Yeah, we'll see what that gets you.
It doesn't matter what it gets me. I'm an old man. That doesn't make any difference to me whatsoever.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm putting it in that fishers are just tend to be more of a quality person. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah, well, I say there was variables to anything else. But John, I'm also going to say, like, that study, scientifically speaking, playful. There's a lot of variables in attractiveness besides the fish. So,
absolutely.
but it's still a lot of fun. I'd love to see a regional study done and just kind of really narrow that down to make sure that your bluegill is hot.
Yes, exactly. This is the thing. This is why both envy and admire, but also just kind of fear for Doc Martin, because to be into research, everything you research one thing and it just just causes
Doc Martin,
things to pop up that you want to look into.
Yeah, Doc Martin, listening to this interview and listening to this story, is vomiting all over her statistics class right now because it's absolutely garbage science. And so I'll acknowledge that. But then I would pose to Doc Martin, which fish do you think is the most attractive for a guy to hold? So that's your future question, Doc Martin.
Oh, I think I know.
Well, don't guess for her. Let her.
Okay,
you don't want to, because you'll do some implicit bias.
That's true.
You say what you're thinking right now.
Okay, I won't. I promise.
Don't say it. Don't say it. All right, moving on. You got a story, John?
I do have a story. Guess what?
What?
Groupers are out there having protected sex.
Well, that's really good news, John, because didn't we just find out that 12% of sorority girls find groupers attractive?
Yeah. So groupers are safe and perfectly all right to find attractive. But of course, this is off Science Daily, which likes to bring you in with these crazy titles, and they got me. Protected sex, grouper mating calls in marine managed areas. And this is a study done by Florida Atlantic University. And what we're finding out, well, we know this. We've talked about this on the show a time or two about the sounds fish make. Groupers produce distinct sounds associated with courtship, territoriality, or reproduction. An autonomous mobile wave glider and passive acoustics were deployed to survey 3 marine protected areas on the western shelf of Puerto Rico. And what they're out to do in this area is locate the spawning aggregations of 2 commercially important species of grouper, the Nassau grouper and the red hind grouper. And the reason they want to do this, they're studying where these fish go, where they gather, because they are very vulnerable when they're spawning. They gather on these big shoals, these big underwater shelves, and they're very concentrated. It's a short period of time, but they actually have set these areas aside so people don't fish in them either on purpose or by accident. And
so their protected sex is in a protected area.
Yes, the protected sex angle is that they are being protected by human beings.
Great headline.
Why they have the sex? Yes, so we've got these protected sex areas, spawning areas.
Right. Yeah, I have one of those, by the way.
No, really? Okay.
Yeah. Yes, it's a little tiny button on my doorknob. You turn to the right.
I guess. Okay, stop. Just stop. Okay. Just
I was
stop.
going to ask you, John, what is your, like, if groupers have a mating call, what is your mating call?
Oh, please, come on, please.
Would you like a glass of wine?
Yeah, it's more just, like, have mercy.
Yeah.
Something like that. I mean, yeah.
We've already said too much, John.
I have said way too much. You really put me on the spot. You
don't have to answer every question you're asked.
We don't?
That's a secret in life.
Okay.
No law requiring you to answer every question you're asked.
Well,
that's how you get in trouble, John.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's get back to these here groupers.
Right.
A Call of the Wild inspired researchers from Florida Atlantic University, Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute to follow and record grouper mating sounds in these managed areas off Puerto Rico. So they had this thing called Wave Glider, which had one way to record the acoustics, and it's moving around. So I guess it's kind of like an underwater drone. And then they had different detectors set, fixed detectors. And as the glider moves in this pattern, they can kind of figure out where the fish are by triangulating between where the glider's picking up sound and the fixed ones are picking up sound. So they not only can tell where the fish are, but they can kind of tell how many are there, the spatial distribution and so forth.
Well, John, let's help people a little bit. So this is future Clay going to do this. So right here, I'm going to drop in the sounds of grouper spawning so people will know the sounds they're making with the mating calls. So I'm going to edit this in. I'm going to drop it in right now. And that's what grouper sounds like.
Wow.
Yeah.
They sound like they're doing all right.
You're doing a great job pretending you heard that, John.
I am. I'm doing a great job, and I actually feel like I know what. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm doing a great job. I'm really good at pretending.
Mm-hmm. Good. Let's keep going.
Anyway, Laurent Cherubin, PhD, senior author and research professor at FAU Harbor Branch, said that there's lots of species of grouper, and most of them have distinctive calls. They're distinctive in duration, peak frequency, and tonal characteristics. And so they're easy to distinguish just by listening or visually when you put it over a spectrogram. Anyway, Cherubin said that what we're doing here is a cost-effective method for us researchers to monitor the fish spawning aggregations, the density. Also, they're finding that they tend to move from one place to another, and they're curious to see if global warming and so forth is affecting where they're spawning, or if they spawn and then move to a holding area. In other words, they're looking to see if they need to protect more areas. And so they want to they want to find more protected sex areas for the grouper. And without the babies, we don't have any grouper. Anyway, I thought it was a really cool study. I love the equipment they use to create a spatio-temporal distribution of these two species in a spawning aggregate. So
I love it. Well, I think it's great. And the headline alone is worth having. So that gets us out of our sexy fish in the news. And I'm gonna play that sex music one more time because I just love it so much. Here we go.
One it seems wants to get more fish in the world. It's up to you and me, girl. Come on.
Oh yeah, John.
Oh, yeah.
Gets me in the mood to talk, to talk more about fish.
Oh, okay, good. I was going to say,
Yeah.
don't you go waking people up now.
No.
That's not nice.
No, we're actually going to be talking to Amy Robeson right now, the Oklahoma Pond lady.
We are going to talk to the Oklahoma Pond lady because, like I say, my pond was way down. And Clay, do you know, like, have you experienced with this that when a lake draws down, either on purpose or by drought, it comes back up? You ever notice how good that makes the fishing?
Well, yeah, because the fish get to spread out, and of course, all those land invertebrates end up in the water. So there's all this food they haven't had before, or haven't had access to in a long time. So yeah, they're eating to get their feed bag on.
Well, we're going to talk to Amy about that phenomenon. We're going to talk about the dangers of drawdown, the benefits of drawdown, and all that good stuff with Amy Robeson, the Oklahoma Pond lady, right now. Hey, Amy, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great, you know, because we got almost somewhere between like 6 to 8 inches of rain. So my pond went from being as low as I've ever seen it to clear up, actually a little bit flooded now that we got enough rain. Because before, whatever rain we got was going straight in, no runoff. Now we got some runoff. So I went down right after the rain. It was completely just right at full. And then yesterday, I went down and it actually was up over the banks a ways. So it was really good to see my pond back in action. But what that whole event, that whole drought event, what we call a drawdown event, made me think of you as always when I'm stressing over my pond or when I'm admiring my pond. And I thought we could talk about drawdown. Drawdown, it's water loss in a pond or a lake or a stream by evaporation, like during a drought, what happened to my pond. But in man-made impoundments, or actually some natural impoundments have controlled outflow as well. A drawdown can be achieved by simply opening the gate and letting water out till it's drawn down 2, 3, 5 feet, whatever they need to do. So drawdown has different sorts of effects on a body of water. And let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of drawdown.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely something that used to be pretty prevalent in the landscape of pond management, it seems. And I think it has a regional sort of flair to it, depending on a lot of different factors. But yes, I think we'll go through some of these different pros and cons with either one, it being natural and it's how it happens, or if it's something that's purposeful.
Right, because purposeful, you control the time of year, and I notice that generally you want to do it sometime in the fall, either early fall if you intend to plant some things in the resulting dry land that forms after you draw down. Sometimes we want to plant in there. Or another reason is for making repairs to the dam or making repairs to the outflow or something like that. And you want to bring that up into a high and dry situation so you can work on it. And they generally pick fall to do that because, tell me if I'm right or wrong, but fall is a safer time to do it because when we have less volume of water, we have less oxygen, we have less room for the fish. So in fall, when they're kind of taking it easy, not their oxygen demand, the heat's not as bad, their oxygen demand isn't so great, that's a good time to do it, correct?
Well, yeah, that's one of the main driving factors behind the time of year for a purposeful drawdown event, because anytime you lower water level, you're not eliminating the nutrient load that's in the pond. And so you're essentially concentrating that nutrient-rich matter into a smaller volume of water that has less capacity to cycle those nutrients. So if you were to do that, say, in the summertime, when your biological oxygen demand is very high, then you could potentially overload the oxygen demand. Even with aeration, you can still overload that oxygen demand and potentially cause a fish kill. So when it starts getting cooler, you know, your demand is lower and the water itself is already going to hold more oxygen because it's cooling off. So it is an overall safer time of year to perform that type of an event or manipulation to your pond for sure.
Well, I noticed that mine, of course, was a natural drawdown due to drought. And as the water got lower and lower, the fishing became tougher because the fish tend to be less active. They tend to stay deeper. It just seemed a little more, I mean, they were still catchable, plenty catchable, but they were a little tougher. You had to get that line way the heck on out toward the middle. They were really concentrated in just a few areas rather than cruising here, cruising there.
Right. And I think that has a lot to do with, well, a couple of different factors, but generally you have more of your structure available in those shallower areas. And when you eliminate that by lowering the water level below what spots those fish generally like to hang out, then they're a little bit displaced, and of course, the fish can determine the loss of water as well. So if there is a significant loss to a system, fish aren't stupid. They can perceive, hey, my little hidey hole, my spot I like to hang out is gone. That means maybe we're losing water. I need to get down to deeper areas so I don't dry up. So maybe I'm anthropomorphizing some, but I think it definitely indicates their level of perception of their environment for a couple of different reasons. But
yeah, I noticed that like 90% of my shoreline brush was first in ridiculously low water, and then a lot of it, up high and dry. And all the willow trees I dropped, 2/3 of them were out, just the very tops were laying in the water. So what was a floating tree with 3 feet of water underneath it now was a tree laying in the mud with just a few inches of water under it. But one reason I know that the purposeful drawdown too is better in the fall is because those pesky turtles, which I love my turtles, even the snappers. I don't throw shade on the turtles. They belong there as much or more than me. But boy, they have field day in the summer when the pond's drawn down because they know right where to go, and they've got the food concentrated. So it's nice in the fall when they start, although I still see one here and there, when they start digging in.
They do slow down.
Yeah, slow them down, get them under the mud, get them out of the way. And you wrote in the notes also, if you draw down to where you don't have much cover for the fish, the herons, because the water tends to get more clear, and you draw way down, and bird that on those long legs, he can go right out where they're at, and they don't have near as many options to get away from old heron now.
That's right. Well, and I mean, if you're concentrating nutrients, you're concentrating your fish into a smaller area. And as a general rule, when people ask how much potential threat turtles impose on a fish population, the truth is that for the most part, turtles are generally not fast enough to chase down a big bluegill or a bass. They're really your cleanup crew. However, when you do have more of a problem with turtles becoming these predatory animals on larger fish is when they are pulled up, when the fishes are in a lower volume of water, they have nowhere to go. And so that is when, that with less cover and less space, those turtles have a greater ability to chase fish down that they may not be able to if they're in a bigger volume of water. So it's the same thing.
It is the same thing. And it's funny, too, because when you go out and fish, the turtles are just a real pain. You got to put your fish, you're keeping fish, you got to put them in a bucket because whether you're on shore in a boat, when the water's down like that, they're really on the hunt. I mean, when you have a large volume of water in my pond, you can dangle your stringer over the side and you're fine. Generally, you're fine. But boy, when it starts to get low, that does not work at all. And any low pond that I've ever fished, they will zero in on that stringer and start robbing you. Within 2 minutes of it going in the water.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've had net sets where you've got fish that are already chopped in half before you can even get the nets out of the water. For the most part, turtles just really aren't going to be a big problem unless you do have something that causes significant volume loss. So, for the most part, we do get a lot of people that complain about the turtles, but the overall impact that they have is relatively limited when a system is full to capacity.
All right. Also, let's go through. So we went through the cons about the fishing getting tougher. and making the fish more vulnerable to predators. You made the point that in many places, what makes drawdown dangerous, especially in Oklahoma and Kansas, is you can't predict the weather around here. You can't even begin to try to predict the weather. You can't predict it within 5 minutes a lot of the time. And so your refill, you may have big plans, like when the Corps drew down the reservoir over here, Hillsdale, and then they turned around, they didn't get any rain in March, April,
to fill it
May,
back up.
June.
Right.
Fill it back up. So whether it's your pond or a big reservoir, what have you, got to be careful, got to keep those fingers crossed, and know that whether you do it on purpose or whether nature's doing it to you, that refill is no guarantee, and when it'll come is very uncertain, correct?
Right. And that's why the purposeful drawdown during fall and winter months is much more common in areas that have a greater ability to predict those spring rains. But at this point with climate change, I don't think any of us need to take that kind of cycle for granted, because it can change, it can shift, it can definitely even delay the filling long enough to where you exacerbate some of those issues from having less volume. And we don't have any way of knowing how long some of these cycles are really going to last. I mean, you went from having your pond be the lowest you've ever seen it and then filling up. And in the fall is not generally when we quote unquote expect those big rains. I mean, obviously in this part of the country, we do have some fall rains, but if you're dependent on those spring rains and you just have no way of knowing if they're ever going to reach your pond, or even more important, reach your pond when you want them to, then that can be a very dangerous game to play.
It's a total gamble.
Yeah. And I mean, you're talking about a pond that you've been around for a pretty significant period of time, and having never seen it this low is a red flag to me that you're not the only one that's experiencing this. So if you don't have something catastrophic going on or repairs that need to be made, then it might not be a good idea just to draw it down as a management tactic.
Okay, Amy, we only have about 5 minutes. So as usual, we've gotten to wandering around and going deep and geeking out like we always tell ourselves we're not going to do, but we end up doing it anyway, but that's all right. Okay, so some of the pros, real quick to a drawdown, that once we talked about making repairs to the dam or making repairs to things that need to be repaired along the shore. This one is that you wrote in the notes, it can actually improve your forage situation in the fall and winter, because once the system is slowed down, you concentrate the fish, it makes it so that they grow more over the winter because they have an easier time finding the prey, which I found to be quite interesting.
This would be more applicable if you're choosing to draw down maybe at the very beginning of fall, when fish are still a lot more active.
Okay.
If you're concentrating their food source, then you give them that extra boost while they're still active, and hopefully put some good resources right in front of their face so that they go into the winter in better shape than they might have been otherwise. I don't know that that's a great reason to do that necessarily, but
more of a side benefit, maybe more of a side benefit. Yeah.
That's definitely one of the methods of thinking about this, and why it would potentially be posed as a management tactic.
Well, it is all about management tactics, and we've talked about the risk, but low water period, like if you have one from a drought and you can't help it, you might as well do something. It's an excellent time to drag in a bunch more brush. You got all that. You don't have to get on the waders. You don't have to put on the hip boots or even the knee boots. You can drag a whole lot of brush out, 5-6 feet from the bank, and then when the water comes up, it's in the perfect spot for the fish spawn, the little bait balls and stuff to run right into after they get off the nest and hide and grow.
Absolutely.
And of course, if you do have on your chesties, wait on out there and put some deep brush in, because now what was 6-7 feet now is only 4 feet. So you can get out and put in some more brush, other structures, your cinder blocks, your things like that, and you can tie your little buoy on there or set your markers so you know where it is when the water comes back up. I read a great article. They talked about drawdown being used to eliminate certain types of vegetation. For example, if you've got one of my favorites, but it is an invasive and it can get to be a problem, especially down south, that pretty little yellow water hyacinths. But even in Arkansas, I guess it gets cold enough. If you've got a drawdown event then going on, the elimination of some of that hyacinths and certain other water plants will be, once again, kind of a side bonus. Maybe you're fixing the dam, but you also potentially improve your shoreline growth.
Right. Well, and something that I didn't put in the notes but ties into this is if you have bank issues, this would also be a good time to work on some of the erosion control or bank stabilization projects that, you know, it can be very cumbersome to try to work on your shoreline, your banks, especially if you have bank collapse going on. Doing that type of repair work while it's full can be a lot more tricky but dangerous also.
It's it's so great when you can drive your machine, you can drive your scoop, you know, right along the shoreline and put the rocks in or put whatever you need in, or do your digging or something where you're not in mud and you're not, you know, because the flip side of dealing with mud is you're going to compact things and you're going to make it harder for plants to use that area. Not only is it hard to use machinery and so forth, but so it's great for all kinds of improvements. Let's just put it that way. Another thing you can do is your aquatic and riparian grass. They have a big thing down at I think it's Cheney here in Kansas down south, where they have it drawn down. And so they're out there putting in an aquatic grass that can grow right either, you know, in a few inches of water up to the riparian
maybe a
zone.
sedge or a rush of some kind.
Something, but they're real big on it. They've done it before, and this, so we talk about, you help your riparian zone. You can also get some aquatic plants in there. Makes a great time to do that. And then when the water comes back up, they're right where they ought to be, want to be. Last thing, real quick, we got to talk about some fishing. I know that you don't fish much, but you make it so us folks that do can have good places to do it. And we all know that when a lake that's been drawn down comes up and that water flows, mine was drawn down for so long that terrestrial grasses, you know, fescue and grasses like that were growing, replacing the millet and the longleaf pondweed and all this. So now all that stuff's underwater. And when you get that water come up and your old shoreline aquatic plant zone comes back up and sometimes comes clear up and floods into your riparian zone, now you've created what we call soft margins, where you have relatively bare where the water's always been. Now you have a transition of plants where the water suddenly is now. And then if it really floods and gets up in the riparian zone, you have yet another zone. And these are all good places to fish. Amy, the Oklahoma Pond lady, tell us why the fishing gets so good when this happens, because it is outstanding.
Well, I know we've talked about this before, but it's all about those little micro habitats. You inundate grasses or other types of vegetation that were not previously inundated, and all of a sudden you've got places for little zooplankton to get food and cover, which draws in your larger aquatic inverts like insect larvae, and then that draws in your little bait fish to prey on the inverts, which draws in your bigger predators. So that it definitely does improve the ability for your smaller organisms to not only find food resources and cover, but it also provides then that whole web effect for everybody else up the chain. Now, if it was just bare, dry dirt, obviously it's a little bit different if that becomes inundated. But if you've got some nice little grasses or forbs or things that are now underwater, then it's almost like a miniature little tree or brush pile that you would create for larger fish.
Yes, it's fantastic. It's just absolutely fantastic. I always, got to caution that new angler, because I've made this mistake in my youth, and you go and you're throwing, you always say the bank anglers want to throw to the middle and guys in the boats want to throw at the bank. Well, you will be shocked thinking, oh, they're not biting today. But all of a sudden you find yourself fishing within 5-10 feet of the shore, and you're diddling around in water you think would normally be too shallow, but that's where they're at sometimes.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're just making casts down the bank instead of straight out toward the middle. You make what you call Arkansas, you throw it parallel to the bank, and you work those soft margins, and you drag your lure around, and you'll be shocked at a lot of the places where you can come up with a fish. Well, Amy, thank you so much for coming in tonight and talking with this old fella about drawdown. It is fascinating to me, and I was breaking a worried sweat over it all summer, but it's over, and the fishing is really good. So thanks for letting us have this conversation, bounce some ideas off one another tonight.
Absolutely. And I think that the take home for this just needs to be that drawdown could be good or bad, depending on what your vision is for it. And it's all very highly dependent on the system and where you are in the country as to whether or not it's something you should take on or if you should just let Mother Nature do her thing.
Well, what'd you think of that, Clay? Pretty cool, huh?
She's awesome, and I'm so glad that she's part of the silliness here on the Fish Nerds podcast.
Yeah, I know. And she asked if she could send in some pet peeves, and I said, heck yes.
Yes, and we already have one. We already played one.
We did.
Yeah, and we'll play some more because I'm sure Amy has a laundry list.
Yes, she's threatening with several. So we'll see.
And by the way, if you're a listener and you're thinking about, hey, I'm gonna send in some pet peeves, I got like 30 things I'm gonna rant about, you can put them all together as one.
Sure. You
can do a laundry list, and that way I don't have to do 5 days of you, David Redden, and the rest of you. Because that's coming, 5 in a row from one listener, David. So
hey, David's always helping us out. We love David.
We're so happy to hear from everybody. So yeah, for sure.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Sure. So drawdowns. How's your lake faring?
It's doing great. Like I say, it came back up. The fishing's good. We talked in there about soft margins, and I've just been working those soft margins, and crappie are cruising along, bass cruising along. And next time I get down there, I am taking my fly rod. I don't care how foul the weather is. I'm taking it with me just in case they are still surface feeding. So
yeah, I'll tell you, it's good. I'll tell you what I'm got in my mind right now. So Conway Lake. It's one of my local lakes I guide on. They had to rebuild the boat launch this fall. So they just did it this week. They drew the lake down 25 feet, down to a trickle. This is a glacial lake that's dam controlled. So the dam was built in the 1800s for textiles, right? So theoretically, the lake is down to its original size from 100-something years ago, which is kind of amazing, which is a much, much smaller lake. And when they built the dam, it flooded the farmlands. There's all these underwater rock walls and cobble everywhere. So,
wow.
What I want to do if we get some nice weather, right now it's in the 30s and windy, so I can't do it, but I want to canoe out and pick lures around the islands where I do a lot of bass fishing, and I know I've lost a lot of lures, and so lots of people probably have. But what I'm concerned about, I'm interested in, is they're not going to block that dam up again until springtime. So for the entire winter, this lake, which is usually a big ice fishing destination lake, and it's impacted by ice, what's going to happen to all those fish? Are they just going to condense down to smaller areas? Are there going to be better fishing, easier fishing? What's going to happen in the winter when that lake freezes this year and it's 20% less lake? So I'm curious.
Are they still going to allow fishing on it?
Yeah. Yeah, no problem.
Well, then, you heard it from the pond lady's mouth. Sometimes when they're concentrated in the winter like that, they actually have easier time getting prey, so they tend to feed more. So
we'll have to see. I'll have to go out and test it. The trick is I can't do a fair test, John, because I've never iced fish on that lake.
Oh, really?
Well, here's the other problem with that lake. There's no access.
Okay.
In the winter. But because of the drawdown, there will be access this year, because now you have this mud flats that'll be frozen. You can walk all the way out to the lake, because usually there's a river that runs out of the lake through the dam. And that river's a trickle now, so that the banks of that river now will all be just frozen. I can walk right up and go fish it. So
that's right, because there's a lot of cabins, a lot of what they call camps up in Maine. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of start at the ramp, start at the little spot of public ground, and then just walk your way on out where you want to go.
Exactly. So, or snowmobile, if I can get my machine running.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll look forward. I'll report back to that. Amy Robinson, thank you so much for that report. Welcome all your stuff. Love that. Let's keep moving, John.
Let's keep moving. Guess what, bro?
What?
Our best buddy, our most prolific correspondent of late, our friend from Rhode Island, he has sent in yet another piece.
Guy's out of control.
The guy is out of control.
Which I like. I like people out of control.
I love people out of control, and this one is about striped bass, and it's talking about how to catch holdover striped bass. So every year, Todd gets more and more of these striped bass that keep hanging around, whereas in years past, they tend to leave the Rhode Island area. He always fishes for them anyway, whether they're good fishing or scarce fishing. He didn't really care, but these past few years, he's just noticing he's having more and more luck with these stripers that are hanging around. So let's listen to Todd Correa, the fish wrap writer, talk to us about holdover striped bass, what lures you use for them, where do you find them, and the reason they're there. Take it away, Todd. Hello, Todd. What's going on in Rhode Island, man?
Howdy, friend. We're doing very well here. We've had something like 15 straight weekends of rain, and we just finally had the first clear Saturday since something like early August. So we're pretty happy over here.
Well, that's fantastic. Where are they at? We had the flip-flop of that. We have been X weeks with no rain and finally had some, but you sent me a message saying, John, I want to come on the show and talk about late season stripers. I want to talk about holdover stripers and some fall tricks and stuff for catching stripers this time of year. And I can never say no to you, sir, because when it comes to stripers, you have me mesmerized. I'm happy to listen to striper talk all day. And since we have a lot of listeners up in the Northeast that are out there catching fish off the jetties and on the inshore, let's hear about these holdover stripers. What is a holdover striper, sir?
Okay, so the short science briefing is that obviously striped bass are migratory species. They generally in this area, they spend their winters in the Hudson or up in the Chesapeake, and they hang out for the winter, and then in the spring they migrate north. And as water's warm, they are migrating farther and farther north. That's kind of a different conversation. So they come up here, they spawn, they do their thing, they feed, they hang out, they get chased by all of us. And then right about, late September, early October, their noses sense the change in the waters and the foods, and they bulk up. They try to get as much protein as they can. They hit those river herring and the shad and the pogies, and they go back south, and they go up the Hudson or back to the Chesapeake. And it's not an anomaly, but historically some fish will go into our salt ponds and up in our salty rivers, and they will stay. That's not unusual. It's pretty normal, actually. What's happened the last few years is that because I'm fortunate enough to chase stripers 12 months a year, there are more fish staying, which has been a real opportunity for guys that have the gumption to go out in January or February. But we're seeing a lot more fish stay for the year-round season. And there's a whole nother conversation for another time about the dynamics of that, if it's good for their population, if it shows a change in their dynamic, if it's bad for their breeding because it throws off their migration and then their natural notice to breed again in the spring. We don't really know. There's not a lot of research there, but I can tell you that right now, salt ponds in Narragansett Bay, which is our massive giant estuary, waters are about 61, 62 degrees, and the fish are feeding.
And so what are they feeding on? You're out there paddling around in your kayak in your shirt sleeves finally the other day, sending me a picture of that delight, and I appreciate that. So you're out there in your shirt sleeves. What are they feeding on? What are you chasing them with, man?
With the water in the 60s, there's a few silver sides left. Small little bait fish are typical. If a 2-year-old drew a picture of a fish, that's kind of what a silver side or little anchovies look like. There's plenty of those, but we have some also migrating fish, which is again another show. We have a local forage fish, menhaden or pogies they call them. The menhaden typically vacate late in the year, like now, and they seem to be staying longer and longer. So the stripers are on shad, if they can find them. The rivers will have American shad, and they also are on to those pogies. And then those river herring, the bluebacks and the alewives, they should be gone, but they're slowly making their way out of the ponds where they've been all summer, and they're also headed offshore. So, Saturday I saw menhaden, I saw silversides, and I saw herring. So those are pure protein, fatty fish that the stripers just love. And, fish are a lot smarter than humans. I'm happy to say that in most situations, I think fish are smarter than us.
Well, they certainly know their business. I want to know your business. How could you tell? Could you actively see them, or by the way they school or surface, or what are you telling me you could tell the difference between these bait fish? Or is it whether it was getting puked up?
Well, two answers to that. If you have a machine on your boat, if you have any kind of a fish finder, you can see the smaller fish like the silversides will ball up real tight balls because the fish are picking them off, just like you see on the David Attenborough PBS shows. The fish are picking them off. The bigger fish like the menhaden and the herring tend to rise to the surface, and they'll trick you because you'll see them from 100 yards away and think you see bass, and you'll paddle your butt off to get over there, and you can't catch anything because they're just little 8 and 10-inch forage fishes. But you have more luck snagging one than catching one. But in most situations, there will be bass under them. Bass are, anybody that chases stripers knows they are notoriously lazy. They are very opportunistic feeders. So some of the smaller bass will go in there and whack a couple of those fish and tear them up, and then the big bass will sit in the bottom with their mouth open and take the free meal.
Well, I hate to cut you off, but that just gets me all shook up because that's white bass and wipers. That's exactly what they do. And you let the little ones under a pound, they'll be thrashing and carrying on and awful fun to catch. But you really want a big one, you got to kind of throw out, let your spoon settle on down below, and that's where the bigger fish are catching the scraps. And then you're going way on down, and you'll have catfish swimming around along the bottom, picking up things that make it through everybody and all the way down. So you can get some nice channel cats and flatheads or blues on the spoon doing that. So that is, I don't know. We've had our true bass episode, and one of these days you're coming my way, and I'm going to show you about wiper fishing in the creeks, and I'm going to come your way. You're going to take me out on these salt ponds, gosh darn it, because this sounds too fun. I love targeting surface feeding or fish that are attacking schools of surface feeding fish. It's great.
So if the listeners that are trying to get on some of this, this lesson, logically applies year round, but it's really important this time of year, especially with the shorter days, colder waters, colder air temperatures. You don't have as long on the water. It's top, middle, bottom. You got to bring some plugs that'll make a lot of noise on the surface if they're up that high, or if you're in some shallow water. You got to have something for the middle, like a spoon or like an SP minnow, something that'll give a little wiggle waggle going through the middle of the water column. And you got to have something that'll go deep, because if you do get something, if you're in a river, you've got 20 feet of water, you've got to have something heavy or to get to the bottom of those fish, to get those big lazy ones, because the best money is on the big fish sitting in the bottom with their mouth open.
So I want to get after one of those. What am I looking at? I got a current, the current provided by tide, or the current of the river coming into the ocean, or is it both, or what am I looking at? And what am I looking at weight wise? I mean, I'm already thinking, hey, a big bucktail jig or a big twister or something like that. But what am I, 1 ounce head, half ounce head? What am I doing?
Most of the time, as the water gets colder, I'm on 1/4 to 3/8 ounce jig heads. Plastics, anything with a wiggle, pearl, white colors are very important. I fish a big, if I think there might be something in a corner, I have this Shimano Splash Walk, which is probably one of my favorite lures ever invented. And it comes in 4 or 5 different.
I'm interrupting you again because you are the poster boy for the Shimano Splash Walk. I don't know how many times I've seen you holding up a honking striper with one of those hanging out of its mouth, but if they are not sending you some free ones and putting you on the advertising, they are screwing up.
I'm telling you, I mean, I'm not on the payroll. I'm just telling you, mano y mano here. I'm telling you that.
Good man.
If you suspect, a lot of the old timers always kept a twitch bait or a search bait, something to bang around. It may not catch something, but it would at least let them know they were fishing the area. You put on that Splash Walk, and I'm a big fan of that bone color. And I mean, that's it. I mean, it could be the shortest marketing approach ever. It works. Like, why haven't you figured this out yet? Why don't you have one? But anyway, you got to have something for the surface. Could be a small little pencil popper, something that makes a splash. You got to have something for the middle, something for the bottom. And I will tell you, this time of year, you do not need expensive lures. You can go to a big box store, one of the big fishing retailers, and a lot of times when you walk through the door, once you get past the giant moose and the transom of a boat or whatever, they'll have these big wooden boxes full of cheap lures, $3, $4, mostly meant for catching largemouth bass. Take a handful of those this time of year, especially later when the fish are really getting fussy because they're cold and they're hungry, but they won't waste a lot of calories to go chase something. You get one of those little small bass plugs, that rattle. The little small trebles, you can put singles on there if you want. And man, if they move side to side and they have little BBs in them, you're going to catch stripers. You're going to catch holdover stripers on those little cheap $3, $4 lures.
Wow, so that's kind of a mid-range, like a crankbait, like a square bill crankbait, or
exactly a crankbait, a little with the square bill, a little bit of a diver. Sometimes, as the water gets real cold, they'll go down, fish will be down the very bottom. So if you're not fishing a spoon or something, get one that dives real deep. A DOA, anything that can dive real deep will get you where you want to be. And that rattling, and that will draw them out. That's your best chance to get one off the bottom.
Wow, that's great. That's great. And speaking of spoons, since you're going to have some spoons in your box, they might as well be Al's goldfish spoons, because those have been catching stripers for years and years and years and years and years. And I know you're a fan of the Al's goldfish.
I am. And, I'll throw in the shameless self-promotion plug. We do have a Fish Wrap Writer edition Al's Goldfish Saltwater Series plug spoon, and it is specifically designed. The genius of Al's was the simplicity. Again, if you're 3 years old, get your grandkid to draw a picture of a fish. Well, that's an Al's Goldfish. There you go. The secret's out on the great design. There you go. Someone's kid drew it on a napkin at a Ponderosa restaurant. But it looks like a fish for a reason, and it's curved just enough to waggle back and forth. And the one that we did for a fish wrap has a couple little spots, looks like a Menhaden. And I'm telling you, man, it works because it's pure genius, because it's simple. I've seen some surf plugs, $40, $50, $60 now, and they're gorgeous. Holographic eyes and all this crazy paint. They're beautiful, the works of art. I think when you start fishing for holdovers and the water gets cold and those fish are smart and wary, what they see is a fish. They see a fish shape go by that's wiggling, that looks like it's injured, and I believe that their little brains say, yep, I can hit that, I can get that, and off they go. It's not so much all the flash and the bedazzle and the bling. It's that simple fish shape with a little bit of wiggle.
Well, that is the wisdom I always look for, I always appreciate, because all the baits you're talking about, an Al's goldfish has a nice, easy-going wobble. We're going drop down with a bucktail jig or a plastic of some sort. Once again, we got a nice meal that's moving at a pace that says, hey, I don't have to exert all this energy. I'm not going to go crazy, but gosh, if they're going to make it that easy for me, how can I resist? And then, of course, a sassy little square bill or a little deep diver wiggling along with the rattles. And if that ornery little thing's going to run right through the middle of us, he's had it. When a fish is laying like that, it's a real trick to get it to move. I mean, you run something right off their nose, they'll generally hit it. But I think your bigger success comes when you can get a fish to move a few feet either from side to side or up and down.
You're absolutely right. And I have been in plenty of situations where I've sat in my kayak in January and I can see the fish under me, and I can see my lure go by it, and I can see the fish giving me the finger. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Take that, Pixar.
But Northland makes some good mid-water plugs, plastics. You get one of those with just enough rattle, and it might be just enough to make them come take a sniff. And that's, right now there's a lot of fish around. The fishing's good. As it gets later, obviously it's going to get tougher. It's like later in the deer season. They're starting to wise up. So that little bit of rattle, that little bit of wiggle makes all the difference.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you for talking to us about the holdover stripers, and that just because the main migration has gone on, there's still some stripers around. It used to be they were hanging out somewhere else further south. Now they're hanging out with you guys. Same game, different place. So it gets you something to fish at. And wow, what a thing to fish at. Because like I say, I've seen some of these late season, wintertime stripers. In fact, when I first started following you, that's what I was seeing. I was seeing you catching these holdovers in these ponds. So I sure appreciate you coming in, telling our listeners what they can go out and do with the type of holdover environments they have up and down the coast. And hopefully they will be able to get out and use some of these baits we've talked about to catch some stripers. Anyway.
Hey, John, can I just add one thing?
Of course.
As the weather gets on and the days get shorter, it's just real important for people to remember to try to limit the amount of time those fish are out of the water. Obviously they have gills. That's where they're taking their oxygen in. And the longer you pose for that ussy with that fish out of the water, especially when those gills can freeze. If you manage to get a bass through the ice in January, February, or in some open water, you got to get them, either leave them in the water, which is the most preferable method, or you got to get them back in the water quick, and give them a minute, hold on to their tails, give them a minute to get their act together, and then let them go, because otherwise those gills get a little bit of ice on them and they're just going to swim 30 feet, roll over and die. And that we don't want that.
No, we do not want that. And that is important because we talk a lot about heat stress on fish, but cold stress, we've had Rhett Talbot on the show. We've had several other people on the show talking about, the trout situation when it's cold, people talking about ice situation, the ice fishing situation. The more you know, the more you know. So be very careful on those super cold days with those stripers. If you can live without a picture, do it. But if you got to have one, get that camera ready, leave that striper in the water, and then the next thing you know, pull it up, pow, back in the water, and gone.
Amen.
All right. Well, thank you for that tip, because it is vitally important to preserve our fisheries. We certainly do not want to have a catch and release ethic that is pointless. So please take care of our fish. Do your best to plan out your photo, get it done quick, and be as humane as possible toward that fish. So you're going to go out and get yourself a kayak. You need a kayak, man.
I have a kayak.
You have a
I
kayak.
bought it 30 years ago. It's a Walden Experience kayak. It's back in the day when recreational kayaks first started becoming popular. And it's before sit-on-top fishing kayaks were a thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but I could never take that out to where Todd's fishing.
Right. No,
I would most certainly die.
Yeah, because you're talking one of them get down in it type.
Oh, yeah, it's awful, and I'm too big for it.
Probably has a round belly and the whole big. Yeah, I like my big wide flat kayak that, it's almost a sup board.
Exactly. I do have a sup board I could take out.
There you go. Well, get out there to that 18 miles of shoreline and find yourself a place and see if you've got any.
Yeah, people definitely do. And you can catch them in the rivers all winter.
Oh,
in
okay.
Hampshire. There's actually in Manchester, this is 3 dams up from the ocean. There are resident populations of striped bass in the Merrimack River.
Really?
They are there year round.
Wow.
They never leave because any anadromous fish, that's not fair to say, because Doc will beat me up for this. A lot of anadromous fish can easily adapt to fresh water. So what happens is sometimes the fish get there and they like it. There's plenty of food. It's warm. And there's plenty of oxygen, and they just stay. And sometimes they follow their instincts and leave. And that's why we have things like landlocked salmon. That's why we have smelt, because those are anadromous. That's why we have all kinds of fish that are landlocked. So, yeah. Even white perch are ocean running fish.
Wow. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, to cut you off there, but you've got me as always. I don't know what it is about where you live, and Todd lives up there in the Northeast. I mean, I want to go. I have dreams of going all over this great country and fishing everywhere.
Me too.
But there's something about the Merrimack River. We just talked about it the other show, how maybe we're going to meet there one of these days. And now I want to get up there more than ever, because that sounds like a lot of fun to me.
Well, that's where I learned about fish. So I'm biased towards the Merrimack River. It has everything in it in New Hampshire, and it's such a historic river.
Yes,
it was the centerpiece of the textile industry in New England for years. So that and the Connecticut River, those 2 rivers are like so important, and fishing is so good in them.
Well, I've just gotten into river fishing here in the past 5, 6, 7 years, and I love it. So that is a date. But you know what? We got one more piece that I went ahead. I had to have somebody help me out. I couldn't get Tim to help me out with this next piece. But we're going to do a piece called KLUR Radio that we used to do on Lure Love. So everybody sit tight, and you'll listen to Todd and me talk about Bob Pond and his Adam Lure Company. All right. Hey, you hear some sort of crackling noise? I hear crackling noise.
I haven't even taken a breath. It's not me.
Well, I'm thinking that's time for us to tune in this old radio over there for KLUR. Good evening, America. Welcome to KLUR. KLUR, Lure History Radio. The year is 1946, and the big band on the stand is Bob Pond with his Cape Cod Canal Orchestra and their new hit song, I Love You with Every Atom of My Heart. Alrighty, this is KLUR, and we are here to talk about Adam Lures, and with me I've got Todd Correa. I had to kind of twist his arm and drag him on in here, but I couldn't get Tim Beat. You know Tim Beat, don't you?
I'm the president of the Tim Beat Fan Society. I As a national organization, I am the CEO and executive director.
Well, I tell you, I wondered about that bust of Tim Beat on your desk, and I wondered what that was all about. But now I understand completely. But he said, I don't have time to do this with you, man. You get pick on Todd because Todd knows about this East Coast stuff. And we are going to talk about Adam lures, which are some of the most famous striped bass lures in history. Back in 1946, angler Bob Pond was wondering, how do we catch these stripers when they're on the surface? Because he was raised to think that they would only take bait off the bottom and that when they were on the surface, they could not be caught. But one day at the Cape Cod Canal, Bob says, I was sitting under the Sagamore Bridge and I saw a striped bass rolling on the surface. And he went down and he saw an angler that had caught a good one. And this cracks me up, Todd, because the guy saw him coming and quickly threw a Turkish towel over the fish to hide what he had caught him on. And as Bob approached, the guy just kind of put his hands on his hip and shook his head no, like, you're crazy. I'm not telling you a thing. You got the looks of a journalist on you, man. I'm not about
doesn't that story beg the question of why the man was fishing the Cape Cod Canal carrying a Turkish towel?
Exactly. I don't know what a Turkish towel is. It sounds fancy and exotic.
It also sounds like something I would not have in my tackle box.
Yes, it sounds like something from a completely different arena. But what happened was that he got intrigued by what he saw there, and Bob was making repeated trips back, and one day he waded out and he felt something bumping into his legs. He looked down and there was a creek chub, minnow of some sort, and he figured it must have come from this fella that he had seen fishing, because nobody fished with plugs in those days, or very few fishers were using plugs for striped bass. And he said it was all scarred up and the paint was a mess and some of the hooks were broke, but he went on down to the breakwater and started throwing it and caught one fish after another. And that gave him the idea to design a surface plug of his own. So he started in on this problem in 1944. By 1946, he'd come up with the Adam Striper Swiper. Have you ever fished with one of those, Todd?
The only striper swipers I have are pretty old, and I don't think I've ever tied one of them on. I'd hate to lose one.
Oh, so those were in your I've got my maybes up here hanging, only under the most dire of circumstances. But I guess a good wooden one can bring you some money, because they only made the wooden ones for a few years, and then they switched over because plastics were becoming a big deal in the post-war economy, in the post-war manufacturing environment. And way he started his company was he spent the winter lathing out, carving out, whatever, about 400 striper swipers in wood, and he sold them all just like instantly. But the ones his friends didn't want or didn't take, the tackle shop snapped up immediately. He always dreamed of having some sort of job in the fishing business, and so to have this lure do so well was like a dream come true for him. And he formed Adam Lures in 1948, and that's when they switched from making them out of wood to making them out of plastic, and they were much more uniform. He could make them faster. He could sell them cheaper. So he located Adam Lures in South Attleboro. He went on and on and on, and finally in 1998, he sold the company, and since then it's been sold a couple more times. You can still get them. I put a link in the show notes about where you can get some Adam Lures. You can get the popper, the Adam Popper, or you can get Striper Swiper. They're still making it. Classic bait. It's just kind of like every fish seems to have some classic old bait that people are still using for it, whether it's muskie or white bass or whatever. And I was just super, super, super jazzed to find out about the Striper Swiper. So what's the deal? Is it kind of a walk bait, or what's the magic behind the Striper Swiper?
Well, there's a couple of things. It has a sparkle. The classic is blue and white. I have probably 6 or 8 or 10 of them out in the garage, the plastic versions that I fish. There's something about the cup in the front, and anybody who fishes for bass, freshwater, largemouth bass, knows that if you get just the right topwater bass and you give it just the right jerk on the right time, it makes that certain special sound that drives fish crazy, right? So that Striper Swiper, when fished properly, you put a decent metal leader on it, because the striped bass don't have teeth, but the bluefish will love that thing, and they have teeth. So you put a bit of a wire leader on it, and when you get that plop just right, I mean, nothing beats it. The sparkle helps, the blue and white helps, and it's also one of those special lures that you can have been torn apart for 3 years. There's nothing left but rags to this thing, and they still catch. Torn to pieces, all chewed up, they still catch.
Wow, that's wonderful. I'm just always fascinated with old lures, and especially local, regional-like lures that I've never heard of because, of course, I don't get to do the same kind of fishing that other people do. In 1965, Bob founded Stripers Unlimited. This is such an interesting thing to me because it's a clearinghouse for biological information, and it's an active organization for conservation measures to protect the fish. And he has been pretty relentless with this. The lures were just a start, but what his passion is now is protecting, preserving, and conserving the striped bass all up and down the Atlantic coast.
John, I think there's something really remarkable and very praiseworthy of someone who invents something so effective that you, a couple of years later, you look back and go, oh man, people are crushing the striper population by lure. We have to do something about it. That's a really, that's an admirable trait to look back and say, yeah, I'm a king for what I invented and the success I've had, but we need to make sure the population stays strong. That's brilliant. He deserves a lot of accolades for that. That's really, it's really amazing. And that group has done well. When he was back in Attleboro, he was selling the kind of the rejects and the pieces there at his old shop in Attleboro, and people could go in and get a handful and get some hooks and put them together themselves. He was way ahead of his time.
Well, I am fascinated. I am so glad I came that Tim sent this article in. I enjoyed talking to you about it. We're going to have to get ready and sign off. I'm looking at that old clock up there, and we are about out of time. But I'm telling you, it's amazing when people like Bob Pond come along, because that's exactly what I think what was going on. He helped the anglers catch a lot of stripers, but sometimes we feel like, hey, my more important calling now is to preserve this fishery so people can enjoy this for generations and generations and generations to come. We will have the link to this article in the show notes. Please read it. It's a lot of fun. Super interesting story, not a long read at all. But Bob Pond, maker of Adam lures that are still around, like so many of the great old companies, they're still around. You can still get one. And apparently our East Coast inshore fishing specialist, Mr. Todd Correa, the Fish Wrap Writer. We want to thank you, Todd, for coming in tonight and helping us with KLUR. You highly recommend Adam lures so much that you're going to keep your babies nice and safe. We'll have to buy you a few new ones that you can go out and lose. We'll buy a couple for Christmas. How does that sound?
Amen. It's my pleasure to be with you. My absolute pleasure.
All righty. We'll be talking to you next time on KLUR Lure History Radio.
John, we got to wrap the show up, buddy. It's getting to be sunrise here in New Hampshire.
Yeah, that sun might be coming up here before too long.
I got to tell you, John, I kind of like recording early in the morning.
Me too.
I kind of prefer it.
It's my time of day. I get up super early because that's when I can get stuff done without being interrupted. So,
yeah.
I tell you what, I don't know who else is up with us. Hopefully you're getting up to go fishing but you screwed up and listened to us instead when you should have gone fishing. So we got some thank yous to put out there.
So many thank yous. We got to thank Wally Pleasant, Diana's Bath Salts, Mysterious Baitcaster Cylinder, Amy, Todd, Tim Beat, our families. Of course, you, the listener, thank you so much for taking the time. The best way to help us out with this gets to grow. We have a goal here, John. We have a goal to get 5,000. It's not a huge goal to get 5,000 people per episode to listen. Right now, we get 1,000 people, solid 1,000 every week.
Yeah, we love you. Hey, 1,000 people, thank you, because it is a rock solid stat for us.
But to really make the show sustainable, that means it makes enough money where it pays all its own bills and maybe puts a couple dollars in me and John's pockets. Right now, we don't make a dollar on this show. The show has a little bit of advertising that pays that kind of, it's almost break even money. So to get sustainable, we need to get to 5,000. That's the magic number that advertisers want to see to give us money. Right now, they give us free stuff, but I kind of want money. so that's what we're aiming for. So the best way to help is please tell your friends about the Fish Nerds. Invite them to come be part of our silliness. All right, John, let's close this show.
Yeah, and keep bringing your ears right on in here every week, because without you, we ain't got nothing to do. All right, let's close out this show. Follow the code of the fish nerds. Spawn early and often.
Never trust a free lunch with strings attached.
And swim against the current every chance you get.
You did it, John. You made a podcast.
Well, heck
You're
yes.
fly fishing in a stream, getting those ankles wet, or deep in the ocean, casting nets. Fish nerds. Fish nerds. Fish nerds. It's a podcast.
Just for the halibut.
Fried in a basket or broiled in a pan. Eat it raw like you're in Siam. Fish nerds. Fish nerds. Fish nerds. It's a podcast.
All right, John. My coffee's cold. My eggs are waiting for me.
Oh, well,
I
get
gotta get
out
out
of
of
here.
here.
Don't eat them cold, man. I'll talk to you soon.
I'll see you next time I see you.
All righty. Later on.